Okay, everybody, thanks for joining us. My name is Todd Richards,
And I'm Darko Vukovic.
and we are part of the County Freedom Coalition. And in this podcast, we are interviewing people who are trying to advance liberty and freedom in the state of Colorado. And today we are joined by, and your first name's not written on there,
Byron Pelton.
Byron Pelton. That's right. Yes. I was just talking, my editing self is way into the future and I'm not here right now. So got to get here. So thanks for joining us. We do appreciate your time. You are running for Senate District 1. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's the northeast corner of the state. I have the majority of Logan County in it, the eastern part of it. And then I also have Logan, Morgan, Phillips, Sedgwick, Washington, and Yuma counties. 6 of them are in the top 10 ag producing counties of the state.
Yes, they are. I think we even have that on that ag poster that was put out several years ago on our webpage, just to show that this whole northeastern part of Colorado probably makes more money for the whole state than all of everybody else combined, just on agriculture. So.
And I think I heard a stat yesterday where 70% of the agriculture comes from this part of the state. So,
yes.
Yeah.
And I think, this little northwest or northeast corner puts it out. And I think it was called the minus the fruit and nut part, which is Southern California with the nuts and all the fruits in Florida. We are the highest agricultural producing area in the United States. So it's a very big agricultural district or area or whatever you want to call this whole little northeast part of Colorado. So
what are some of the top products being produced in that area, Byron?
Well, we have corn, we have wheat, we have cattle. Cattle's huge in the northeast corner because we have the corn. The other thing is dairy's huge up here because we have several dairies in Yuma County and Morgan County and in Weld County, of course. Sugar beets huge up here. We have a lot of sugar beets being grown up in the northeast corner of the state. I'm trying to think of something else. Those are the big ones. Those are the really big ones that I can see from my window at my house for sure.
Great.
Is that better?
Yeah.
We had a little bit of a glitch, but we're back.
Yep.
Oh, I think we caught that answer.
Yep.
Just curious, Byron, I saw on your website that you had food prices. I should really say kind of inflation and saving you money as kind of your top initiative. Is there any benefit to being close to the farms that produce these things in terms of prices for the average consumer?
I mean, you have some benefit. Like for instance, my father and I, we grow our own beef, and my wife and I have a small cow-calf operation. But right now, for instance, I just moved all my cattle from grass down to my dad's place in Strasburg because that's where I'm going to calve them out. But that's also where we feed out our cattle before they get butchered. So that helps. If you're in it, it helps you as a family, but it doesn't necessarily help you at the grocery store as much. It might a little bit, but not much. But for the most part, it's helpful for the families out here that grow their own food for sure. Yes. And if you guys have huge gardens in your neighborhoods or wherever you might live, that's just as helpful. You put in the work and you're able to can and that sort of thing. Like when I was growing up, and I'll give you a little background about myself. I have a very large family. My grandparents had 13 children. There's about 30 of us grandkids. And grandma had 1 acre of a vegetable garden that we all got to go out and work. We thought that was fun, back in the 70s and 80s. But we would all work that and help grandma can in the can and jar all the vegetables, so we would have something to eat during the winter times. And it's a great deal to learn that. So that's something that we did growing up, but it's really helpful with the food. So if you ever have a food shortage or anything, and you have those cans, you're going to be better off. So
where do you live?
I live in Sterling, Colorado.
Okay.
I was born in Burlington, Colorado. If you guys have,
I've been through there.
okay. And the town that I grew up in was Cheyenne Wells, which is 37 miles south of there.
Oh, yeah.
And then after my parents got divorced, I got moved up to Basalt, Colorado, and that's where I finished high school. Was up in Basalt on the western slope, where my dad and I had a cow-calf operation, and we ran about 400 head of cattle up there on BLM property. So that's what we did.
Well, you've lived all over the place, out in the wide open prairie where I don't even think you can see the mountains from out in Burlington. Maybe just a little bit, but
yeah, you'd have to go to First View. There's a town called First View, and the reason why it's named First View is because it's the first view of the mountains. So
yeah. And then you go up to Basalt, and just basically living in them, down in the canyons down there in the river valley. So yeah, that's quite a change.
Yeah, it was a culture shock. Absolutely. I mean, the nice part about it is that other than being in the military, I've lived in rural Colorado my whole life. And, in the past, what do you want to say, 4 years or so, you've actually seen a war on rural Colorado with some of the things that have been passed in the legislature. And it's just been pretty frustrating for all of us. I mean, I understand what we deal with out here on the Eastern Plains, but I also lived over there for 11 years, and I understand what they're dealing with too, because that's still rural Colorado. I mean, it might be a resort community in Aspen, but down valley, it's still rural Colorado. There's not a lot of services that they are able to have, like we're not able to have out here because of the location of where they're at. So, and it's unfortunate that the legislature forgets about rural Colorado.
Well, that's a good point. Is just because they're in the mountains doesn't, they're not out on the plains. They're not rural Colorado. You get up to some of those mountain towns, they're out in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, and they're rural Colorado as well. They might be just have little gardens in their backyards or whatever, and they don't have a lot of space out there. So yeah, they're just as rural as being out in Cheyenne Wells, as being in some of those little mountain towns, out south end of Steamboat Springs, where there's really not anything out there for miles and miles and miles. And people kind of forget that rural Colorado is just not the eastern plains. There's a lot of rural Colorado all over the place. So
yeah, one of the towns that I go to just about every year is Dinosaur. I go hunt in Unit 10 for cow elk, and we usually go the day after Christmas, and I spend a lot of time up there hunting for elk. And that's a small town out there is, and so is Rangeley, so is Meeker. Those towns are pretty small as well.
Yep. And I was going to ask you, is the urban divide real? And you've already answered that question for me. So we've had some people get really, really passionate about that divide, that there is a war on rural Colorado. So unfortunately,
sometimes I think that the war on rural Colorado can be prevented with just a little bit of education. I don't think that sometimes that the Front Range legislators understand. Not only I think they understand where their food comes from, but I don't think they understand how much we contribute to the budget to the state's budget, and how important it is to keep our ag economy in good graces with the state, because I think that our ag economy is what made Colorado the best state in the U.S. in my opinion. But it also has made us be able to be self-sufficient and pay for these programs that everybody wants to spend money on. And they need to recognize that. They need to find out on the second largest economy that we have is agriculture in the state of Colorado. Because every county, just about, I'm not going to say every county, just about every county has agriculture in it. And it's on that map that you described earlier when we were talking.
How much would you attribute that conflict, or you guys referred to it as the war on rural Colorado? How much is it a culture war versus a war against targeted industries like ag and energy, and they happen to be in rural portions of the state? What are your thoughts on that? What do you think is the motivating factor to it?
Well, I think ag and energy are our culture. I think that it goes hand in hand. And what I tell people all the time is I'm a master electrician, and I have that job as a master electrician to pay for my cattle habit because I enjoy raising cattle. I enjoy being part of agriculture, but it doesn't necessarily make a lot of money all the time. And families struggle, especially right now. We're in a time of struggling because of the drought that we've been dealing with. We've also been dealing with high diesel prices that have really affected trying to find hay right now. And then when you find it, you have to pay the large freight in it. I think that has a lot to do with it. I don't think you can separate the culture or the industry, because I think it is our culture, what you described. Because being in agriculture is a way of life. It's not just our culture, it's who we are as a people out here. We really saw it during the pandemic. And I'll give you a great example is that before the governor came out with that mask mandate, we were discussing it as a health board, because I'm a Logan County Commissioner and I sit on the health board out here. And we were really discussing it and saying that masks aren't going to work out here because we're so far apart that people are not going to put masks on. It's just not going to happen. And, we are always willing to help each other. We see it all the time with, people getting cancer that get cancer, and we have big fundraisers. The community comes together, pays for that people. We know that we're the people that we rely on as our friends and neighbors. And that's another part of our culture. And we were doing that during the pandemic. I mean, we had our Heritage Center, which is the senior center. They were going out and doing the shopping for the seniors so they could stay home. These are the things that they were doing, getting volunteers to do that. And we were taking care of ourselves. We didn't need the state to come in to tell us what we needed to be taken care of. In fact, the state is what brought COVID to us, because we have a prison out here and they transferred the prisoners from another facility and brought COVID into our community. It started right there. So, I mean, these are the things that we were taking care of ourselves before the big state government came in to tell us how we needed to take care of ourselves, and they actually messed everything up. So,
yeah, I wonder sometimes. It's like, what's the motivating factor? It's like, is it number one, we want to attack this community and we'll do it through their industry, or is it, hey, we want to attack this industry and I'm sorry that it impacts their way of life? And so I try not to get conspiratorial, but that question floats around in my mind. And even what you just last said around independence, it's like, to a state government, how do you rationalize saying, well, there's this group of people and they're perfectly fine and they're perfectly independent, they're taking care of themselves and they're not relying on us? How do we justify our existence if there's such a cohort, and if that cohort is actually thriving compared to the remainder of the state where we are actively involved?
Well, and we're a very resilient people. I mean, we've been able to outlast the Dust Bowl out here. There's people that's lived out here for as long as the Dust Bowl's been around, and we've been able to outlast that. And it's generational. And it was so funny because one of my biggest frustrations is that we had epidemiology that was showing us that we were getting the majority of our COVID cases from people traveling outside our county. Well, what it was coming down to is that when the governor shut down the restaurants, the people were going 45 miles north into Nebraska, having a sit-down meal, and then bringing it back with them into our communities. So we told our restaurants, hey, open. Our sheriff said open, He will, if there's somebody that comes in and tries to shut you down, he'll arrest them for trespassing. These are all things that we were trying to do everything we could to protect our restaurants because it was going to help us in the long run. And then the governor sent down the Department of Revenue to come threaten our restaurants and actually shut some restaurants down. And they're in Fort Morgan because they refused to close too. And I mean, it was just very frustrating. One of the things that drove me nuts is he just had a debate with his opponent, and he said that he gave local governments all the control over the health department. And I'm here to say he did not give us any control. So it was just us coming out as a community saying, open your restaurants, we'll support you. And we had 2 or 3 restaurants stay open through the pandemic, and it was pretty helpful for all of us. So
yeah, I'm just curious. Did you mention that the governor did, or the state, I should say, did actually end up succeeding in shutting down some businesses?
Yeah, because he sent the Department of Revenue down to threaten their liquor licenses. So that's what he did. And in fact, it's actually been in some newspaper articles where you'll see that he closed the state, not he, but the state closed down Cables, I think, down there in Fort Morgan. I think it was Cables or one of the bars. I can't remember which one it was, but actually shut it down and suspended their liquor license because they wouldn't shut down.
So that gets me thinking, what's your thought on maybe having, I don't know if this would be a constitutional amendment or a law or a bill, or I wouldn't know how to classify it in government terms, but basically something that says that you can't take away somebody's license in an area unless they violated the rules of that area. So meaning you would have to violate liquor laws to lose your liquor license, not something else that's unrelated totally to it. Any thoughts on legislation that kind of compartmentalizes the state's tools in pressuring people?
I like where you're going there. I think it should even go further than that. I think it should say local control, because essentially the counties are an arm of the state. And if that community chooses to act a certain way, I think that community has the right to act that way and have that local control. You know, this one size fits all mentality that comes down from the legislature, it's what hurts rural Colorado. And because they don't understand, especially our governor, he doesn't understand rural Colorado issues that we have and has ignored us several times. And I think that that's the biggest thing that we should do with legislation, to say, listen, the counties are an arm of the state. Why don't you trust the counties, give them the local control, and let them make the best decisions for their communities?
Yeah, no, I would love to see some reform along those lines that basically, you know, puts constraints on the state to where they really should be, instead of, you know, having free reign to dictate from the top down and use coercive methods like this to enforce their will.
I think this is why elections are so important. I mean, if you have somebody like a governor that wants to go ahead and dictate to you the entire state on how you're going to act during a pandemic, or if you're going to have a governor that it says, listen, commissioners, I want to have meetings with you. I want to have weekly meetings with all the commissioners. Tell me what you're going through. Let's talk about how we can help your health department and support you. I mean, that's what we did with the schools. Our health department, we told our health department, you're not to tell the schools how to act. You're there to support them. They have their own board. Their own board will figure out what they're going to do for individually for each school. You're just there to support them. That's all you're there. If you want to give them advice or help them out with this, that's what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to dictate to the schools on how to act, because I mean, that was one of my frustrations, as I have a family member that's a principal at one of our schools. And I remember him calling me saying they're not going to let us play football. And I'm like, this is the dumbest thing ever. I mean, football is outside. and I'm just like, you guys, I don't understand. These kids need this stuff. We were one of the northeast corner of the state. We were one of the best parts of the state that had an actual fair. We let our livestock and our 4-H kids actually go in and show animals and have that part of the fair, because it was so important to our kids and our community that we would do that. And And I don't know why they would take that away from the schools and that sort of thing. So that's something that we pushed, is that, hey, health department, hands off and just be supportive and let those schools have that local control.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you on the elections. I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to kind of enshrine some of these principles into the law, so that, tomorrow, if there's a populist movement one way or another that swings way out of hand, that they can't just use the presence of holding these seats as the right to then impose authoritarian views, that there's something that would allow us to challenge them in the state Supreme Court and hold back their executive authorities.
And I'm about transparency. I don't know why we haven't done this yet, because and this is my commissioner's perspective, going to be a state senator. But I don't know why we haven't done like an audit over of how we did the pandemic. Where did we do well? Where did we fail? I think that needs to be done, and even to see how we could have future legislation to maybe curb some of that control, or maybe even boost up the county and then how they've done stuff. And boy, that's a great idea over here. We shouldn't reinvent the wheel. We should be learning from each other, and how moving forward would help us. So that's something that would be really good to do. And that's something I'm going to kind of explore when I'm in the Senate, to see if we can't do that, because I don't know why we haven't done that yet. We should really see what mistakes we made and what the good things that came out of it. And because I think if we ever had another one of these, I don't think you're going to get the compliance you got before. So
right.
That,
And heaven forbid that it's has a high mortality rate where people dismiss it on the basis of it was so botched with COVID, and then we actually do have a real emergency that requires us to get together, and and then people just dismiss it because of their past experience.
Yep.
That sounds like a typical military after action plan or program. So that when you said that, it's like, oh my goodness, I know exactly what you're talking about. So that's a very good point to be able to have something like that, because when you do an exercise, or out in the real world, going out and shooting guns and doing real world stuff, is when something was over, there would be what did we do right? What did we do wrong? And there was always some kind of after action plan or program that was taken, and there's been nothing. Nobody, did Weld County do well? People in Weld County would say, yeah, we did well, because our commissioners and our sheriff stood up to Polis and just basically told, too bad, this is the way we're going to do it. And then there's other counties, and some of those places are almost still like it's still COVID going on. They're still, you got to go, you have masks to go into some places, and some places you don't. So yeah, it's a really interesting, it's a great idea, is to have some kind of plan or program that says, hey, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? And that'd be fantastic.
And let's expose it. And if there's, things that we did right, good. And if there's things that we did wrong, well, that's a good opportunity to improve.
Yep. Good idea.
One of the things I told our health department director was, I said, my biggest fear with this is that you'll never have trust in the health department again. And don't get me wrong, the health department has done some really good things for our communities and kept us safe. But when it become that overpowering, overreaching hand, I didn't like that aspect of it, because we have good people working at the health department, and I didn't think it was fair to them. But we also need to keep ourselves in check, and that's what the local control was so important for, that we lost during that whole pandemic.
Yep.
And God bless Weld County and their commissioners and their sheriff, because they gave us the example for all of us else to follow, and it was awesome.
Yep.
Oh, that's great. You mentioned that the sheriff threatened to arrest people for trespassing if they came here to enforce these laws. Any reason he didn't, basically do that with, I believe you mentioned it was the Department of Commerce?
Department of Revenue?
Department of Revenue, yeah.
I don't think he was called on. I think he left in a hurry, because I think somebody had told them that.
That's pretty funny.
So I will tell you that our health department quit sending people here. So because when he said that, I was like, I called up our director and said, don't send him down here. So,
Yeah. That's pretty good.
so but yeah, I'm pretty sure that that's why it happened, because I don't think nobody called the sheriff, because if they would have, I think it would have gotten, I was like, we probably would have got sued and all that other stuff, but it would have been a good thing. I supported our sheriff in doing that. So.
Yeah, no, and this is an exercise that I've thought exercise I've tried to have with a number of people of like, is there room to lean on your local law enforcement to protect you against another law enforcement agency, which is trying to impose unconstitutional laws? Or is it to say that, hey, let them do their job, an arrest is not a conviction, you'll have your day in court, and it's really up to the courts to hear your arguments and to defend your civil liberties and rights. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we saw that with the red flag bill. One of our sheriff was one of the first ones that said, I will not enforce that. And we came out with the sanctuary county for Second Amendment rights. And when we talked about that over and over and over, the biggest thing was to make sure we didn't spend any county money enforcing that law, because people out here, you've got 45 minutes in some places out here that you're going to have to wait on law enforcement to get to your house. And I think that the Second Amendment is so important for our citizens out here, not only just for that, but also for protecting your livestock, for protecting your family. I think it is so important that the sheriffs are always going to be elected by the people, because the people hold those sheriffs accountable. But those sheriffs are also they're going to follow the Constitution because they swear an oath to it, but they're also going to be the guy that you look for, the top cop in your counties. And it is very important that you have good sheriffs. And when you have elections, that you elect a good sheriff, because they're the ones that are going to follow the Constitution. And you're totally right. If you have one law enforcement agency fighting another law enforcement agency, but right now we have all the law enforcement sticking together as they should be, because they're fighting the people who make laws in the legislature. I don't know if you guys saw that article in the paper on the Denver Gazette saying that survey that came out that talked about the people are not being cops because they have no support from the people who make laws. And I think that that's very unfortunate right now, what's going on. And I think that we really need to pay attention to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So can you help us understand what's the difference between the House and the Senate? Is it really just two bodies and a bill has to kind of go through both, or are there any differences between the two bodies?
Well, there's a little bit of difference. We get to anybody that the governor appoints, they have to be confirmed by us, by the Senate. So that's a big thing. The other thing is when we make laws and send it to the House, and the House will change it up, and then we get to have that committee to where we will make the committee to make that bill okay. That's how we do it. I cannot remember the name of the committee. I apologize.
Is it reconciliation? Maybe?
There you go. Something
Okay.
like, yeah.
That's a guess. I'm not saying that's the right name.
Well, I was going to use the House because I'm better at the federal stuff than the state stuff right now.
Right.
But yeah, I'm learning about everything that the Senate's doing or that does and that sort of thing. But I will tell you that I have talked to Paul Lundeen about possibly being on the Ag Committee. And I know that I want to be on the Ag Committee because of my district. And then that I would serve anywhere else that I needed to serve. So interim committees or any of the other committees. But the one thing I really want is the Ag Committee to really protect of our agriculture and our citizens that produce the agriculture. So, but I can tell you that that's one of the things I know, that we will confirm any of the appointees from the governor. So.
Cool.
Interesting. Yeah, I know it's a little bit different than federal, but not a whole bunch, but just a little bit. Let's see, what do we got here? We kind of ran through a bunch of these questions I had for you already. how do you define compromise? And is there any room for compromise when a citizen's constitutional rights are at stake? So that's a big compromise. You always hear, well, I'm going to reach across the aisle to the other side for some compromise, and it's here's a constitutional right being violated, or it looks like it's going to be violated, and I don't think that is there room for compromise or not?
Not when a constitutional right is in jeopardy. Absolutely not. And the good thing is that, and you've seen a lot of these House district and Senate district candidates that have military in their background. We all took an oath to serve the Constitution. We've never been relieved of that oath. I believe in my hearts that when you go to compromise, you don't compromise your principles, and our principles are in the Constitution. And that's one of the things that I really will never compromise on is constitutional rights. In fact, that red flag bill, when it first came out, I was already writing my testimony when I first heard about it as a commissioner, because I was going to go up there, and I was sitting right next to other commissioners that served in the military that believed the same way that I did, how it violated our Second and Fourth Amendment rights. And those are very important to us, and that we should never make laws that violate those rights. And that's the way I believe. I will do everything I can to make sure I don't violate somebody's constitutional rights.
All right.
So what are your thoughts on laws that do get passed, which violate people's constitutional rights? Is there a way to appropriately protest those, not adhere to them? What would be your advice to the average citizen who is concerned about that?
Well, this is what gets me in trouble. So I always say, are they enforceable? Because that was why we were opening up our restaurants, because you can't come down here and enforce us to close it. So, because as far as I'm concerned, that's somebody's private property that the state has no jurisdiction over. And that was something that I was telling these restaurants. I was like, they can't come down and enforce it. What are they going to do? Send the National Guard down here? It's not going to work. So, I mean, that gets me in trouble when I say that. So one of the biggest things is making sure that we have lawsuits that go through the courts to make sure to protect our constitutional rights. I think we've seen over and over and over again. I think I just saw a ruling in New York where they just reinstated people who were fired from their jobs because they wouldn't get the vaccination for COVID, because that violated their rights. And I think that's where we have to fight that battle, is in the courts. But I always like to point out, if it's unenforceable, I mean, a law is a law, but if it's unenforceable, I mean, how do you, like in football, when I played football, I was like, it's only a penalty when you get caught. So that type of thing. You try to do the best you can, but if you end up holding that person, because I played offensive line, you're going to, and you get away with the holding. You're like, hey, I got away with one. But that's the biggest thing is, are they enforceable? Can they enforce them? So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's probably fair to say that advice is for laws which people deem as unconstitutional, not for any law that you maybe don't agree with or don't like.
That's correct. That's good advice. Thank you for helping me. Thank you for saving me there.
Yeah. Just so it doesn't get taken out of context. Yeah, and it's tough. It's tough because I'm kind of on a quest to see like how much of it, and maybe it just boils down to, listen, as an American, you're going to have to grow a pair. And when the government tries to infringe on your rights, you're just going to have to fight them on it. And yeah, it's not going to be pretty. And yeah, it's going to be costly. But at the end of the day, you will prevail. And if you prevail, you can sue for damages. And so don't be a pushover. Don't get caught in this situation where you're out of convenience following tyrannical laws and dictates just because you don't want to deal with the discomfort of standing up against it.
That's correct. I mean, the one thing we don't want is a bunch of Clive and Bundys, because that's not the route we want to take. But we definitely want to be able to fight for our rights in the court system, because I think that if we can stand up, and if all of us stand up, that's a huge deal if we all stand together and protect our constitutional rights. and we have more and more people on our side, because I don't think that people quite understand what it's like to live in a country where we don't have rights, because nobody understands that. Our founding fathers did. That's how we got our rights. So
Yeah.
that's how we got the protections we have.
Yeah, sometimes I'm demoralized because I read about what they were really harping about, and I'm like, gosh, like, are we dealing with more than what they were dealing with? Like, did we get soft? Like, we make it seem like, oh, it only got better from that point, but it's like, no, I think a lot of stuff crept back in.
One of my favorite arguments, because since I went to school up on the Western Slope, I have a lot of liberal friends, and we do talk quite often. But my favorite thing was about the Second Amendment. And I said, the Second Amendment is so important to protect all the rest of the rights that are in the Constitution. And they said, no, Byron, that was when we had muskets and everything else. And I said, yeah, because if we didn't have the Second Amendment, George Washington just would have shouted down the British, because that's how that works. And that usually quiets them up pretty quickly. So
yeah, and make sure to remind them that at that time it was perfectly legal to own a warship as a privateer. So you could be commissioned by the Navy to execute government. And even today we have, I think, Blackwater, basically mercenary armies that are perfectly privately owned. Now, I don't know to what degree they're allowed to operate on U.S. soil and what regulates them. So I'm no expert there, but I mean, I'm pretty sure you can own an army today as an individual citizen.
Right. I mean, but I think to the degree is to help and support our military, because our military is going to be everybody in the room that I'm interviewing right now that we have that's in the military understands that we still have a commander in chief and a chain of command and everything else. So we have to follow certain rules, and I think that we hold them accountable to follow our rules as well. So.
Right.
And you have to bring up to your friends there that we didn't have Twitter and computers and ink pens and things like that. They had quill and paper. So it's the same thing. So that's always my favorite argument on the Second Amendment. Well, we just had muskets. Well, we also only in the freedom of press only had quill and paper. We didn't have the internet. So take that away.
I always wondered how many times they passed around the Thomas Paine stuff that he wrote, because I was like, some of that stuff is just brilliant. I mean, some of the stuff that Paine wrote was just awesome, and every time I read it, I always get charged up. I'm like, yeah, freedom. I feel like paint my face blue and say freedom like Braveheart and that type of thing when I read Thomas Paine. So,
love it.
That's pretty funny. That's good. Yeah.
Well, if you ever do that at the state capitol, make sure to invite us. We'll be right behind you.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be fantastic. Oh, be out there with riding on a horse. Gotta be on a horse.
I'm not wearing a kilt though. I can't do it.
Yeah. No, it's gotta be on a horse, because that makes everything that much more exciting. Yeah. I'm just reviewing my my questions here, and it seems like we've pretty much covered all of your questions. Our questions in your
I've got one more for you, Byron.
Okay.
I noticed on your site one of your top issues is behavioral health, and that's not one I've seen in any of the other candidates that we've interviewed. So I'd love to give you an opportunity to maybe talk about that and educate our audience.
So in Eastern Colorado and rural Colorado, essentially, I've been working to get more services and more resources out to our areas. But in order to do that, you have to have accountability and transparency into the system. And some of the things that I've been able to do is I was on the governor's appointed behavioral health task force, where we actually came up with the BHA, the Behavioral Health Administration. And one of our goals, and actually this actually happened before, let me tell you this part first. The part that happened before the BHA was that a bunch of us commissioners got together, Wendy Buxton Andrade down in Prowers County and myself went to CCI, which is our our legislative lobbying group, which is Colorado Counties Incorporated, and actually came up with a bill to bring accountability and transparency in the behavioral health system. Because what we were finding is that there was a lot of money. I think there was 1.4 or 1.3 billion with a billion dollars spent in the system in the state of Colorado, where nobody could tell us why we weren't getting the services out here, but there was money being spent out here. So we were trying to figure out where all this was going. And so we did that. COVID happened. The bill fell away. I think Jonathan Singer Jonathan Singer, Representative Pelton, and Senator Sonnenberg were going to be our sponsors. And so that bill kind of fell away. We ended up having COVID. We had 8 youth in the Eastern District, which is 10 counties at CCI, commit suicide during COVID, which also then just exasperated the problem with behavioral health and what we were trying to get happen out here, to have more resources and more funding. And so I was able to get on the behavioral health, appointed on the behavioral health task force, and we moved forward and came up with some ideas to bring transparency and accountability to the system. We also created a system where the mental health centers that are all across the state of Colorado are no longer a monopoly, where the only place where you can get Medicaid support is from them. Now it's opened up the system where it can be a free market system, where more people can get that. And so we're trying to move forward to where the behavioral health system is not broken. I think we've seen with the uptick of homelessness and drug use, and a lot of the drug use that we've seen is because of the mental health and their coping and that sort of thing. And I can give you some experience with me. My brother, who passed away probably five years ago, who was he was high on methamphetamines and walked in front of a car and was killed. So, and we dealt with his drug use for quite some time and that sort of thing. So what we were trying to accomplish with this is that making a transparent behavioral health system where we know where the money is going, where they're going to be held accountable by elected officials and community members in those communities. And we were going to try to open up the system to create more resources and more funding to go to those resources and that sort of thing. So that's what we were trying to do with the Behavioral Health Administration. As you know, with government, it's not always perfect, because there was parts of that bill I did not like the 45 FTE that they hired. That was not a big fan. I was not a big fan of that, but those are the kind of compromises you have to make. Like I was talking about, it didn't hurt anybody's constitutional rights, but it did make government bigger. I was not a fan of that. However, I was a fan of the accountability and transparency that they will bring to the system. So,
yeah. And I mean, again, those FTEs, if they are directly contributing to a major social problem, then that's money well spent, right? But if they're just administering a program and adding overhead, then that's not money well spent, and obviously there's going to be some level of administration to any program, but sometimes those things get way too top heavy, where it becomes, too much of a bureaucracy and not enough of a social service.
And what do we see in the northeast corner of the state? And Sheriff, I've talked to Sheriff Reams about this. I talked to our sheriff. I've talked to sheriffs across the state. We have a huge methamphetamine, now getting to be fentanyl problem here in the northeast corner of the state. We are the worst in the state for methamphetamine because we have I-76 and 14 and everything else, the big super highways that run through here. And it just becomes an issue. And I think that a lot of people with that need behavioral health don't get behavioral health counseling or even drug use or substance use disorders. I don't think that they get the help that they need. And for instance, I'll give you a great example about this. And I love Weld County because they have North Range and they do a great job. And they also have Island Grove, which does a great job, but that is our only detox center for 10 counties in the northeast corner of the state. So if you have a substance use disorder in Burlington or Cheyenne Wells, you have to go all the way to Island Grove to the detox center.
Wow.
So
Wow.
there's a lot of issues with that.
Yeah, and you have to
think
also
I
ask
froze.
yourself, what is all the impact on the citizenry from having people out, suffering, or even high on meth, high on fentanyl, and what's the total aggregate cost to society versus what would it cost to build additional facilities to? I don't know where you stand on this. I'm a fan of forced institutionalization until you come clean. I don't think it's human right. I don't think it's human kindness to let people suffer on the street. And I think drugs are powerful enough to let you to have you lose self-control. So I don't know that we're doing them a service by letting them live on the streets, but I'd love to hear your opinion on this issue.
I think you're right that we're not doing them a service, but I also think you have to be very careful. One of my things that I hate as a commissioner is I am in charge of the Department of Human Services. And sometimes we have to take children from their homes because their parents are high on methamphetamines. Perfect example, I think it was 2018, we took 68 kids from their home to the tune of $1.3 million is what we were overspent with child welfare because we had to do that. And so that is the kind of systematic thing that we're seeing. And sometimes the families don't want the kids back because they're more concerned on getting their methamphetamine than they are the kids. So we deal with that quite often up here. And I see what you're saying with that. The only thing is that I think there needs to be penalties to incentivize these people to get help. That's where I think we go. That's where our crime is going. Our crime is going so high because they need to find a way to get their drugs. And if we don't start making these things felonies and then say, hey, if you get help though, we'll knock this down so it's no longer a felony. These are the things that we need to work on in the legislature to fix this situation. We also need to work on the behavioral health system to make it better, to make sure rural Colorado has some solutions, because a lot of that money is always being spent in the middle of the state, and that's not always the best. Something that really bothered me when I started working on behavioral health is I actually had one of my superintendents out here in Northeast Colorado tell a family, if you want better behavioral health, move to the Front Range. So that's what they were telling families. So that really bothers me because I think that we have the best community in the state out here, and communities in the state out here. And I think it bothers me when people tell you to move away just so you can get a service that's not offered out here.
Yeah. Is it true that the fentanyl comes from China? Do you have any exposure or insight or information on that?
Most of the fentanyl I hear comes from the south of the border. That's
Okay.
most that I hear from my sheriff. It's coming from the south of the border, and that's the problem. And I don't know if it's getting from China to the south of the border and getting in here, but that's for the most part where I hear it's coming from.
Yeah, it's just a rumor. I'm not making that claim. I don't know. How about the meth? Is that made in the U.S. or is that also coming in over the border?
Coming in over the border. And
Wow.
so, and now they're finding, the reason why I said we're having more of a fentanyl problem is because they're mixing fentanyl with the methamphetamine now. So,
Jeez.
So these are all issues that we get to deal with. Everybody thinks when you run for county commissioner, it's all this glamorous job, but when you work in the Department of Human Services with that, you really see the parts of the state or of your community that you're like, wow, I had no idea, or wow, this is really going on. We need to fix this. These are the things that we see. And a lot of it comes back down to the behavioral health system.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I that's why I'm always an advocate of being respectful, even if you disagree with your county commissioners. You guys are dealing with a lot, so get your point across, but be respectful. your one issue is not the only thing they're dealing with. So keep that in mind. So thank you for that. Yeah, and we hope to have you back on when you're a senator. We'd love to keep the conversation going if you're up for it.
Sure. Yeah, I don't mind having this one, and you guys have been great, and I really appreciate you having me on here. This has been good questioning, and I always like talking about freedom. So
Yeah. I think pretty much everybody that we've interviewed now that is just, man, freedom, 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 liberty, freedom, freedom. It's just nice to hear, that there's good people out there that are running for office, and hopefully we can get take our state back and change things a little bit for the better. So it'd be great.
I have to tell you, it's been very, when I first started this, and this was January, almost a year ago, and I started meeting people across the state that were running, I was taken back about how many veterans are running. I was just so impressed with that, because that tells me that we really want to stand for something, and we really want to stand for our Constitution. And I find that so wonderful that is the case, and that's what I'm seeing. So I was just so impressed by how many military veterans were running for elected office.
Yeah, you think about it, it's been more than 50% that we've talked to, and people that I've talked to that haven't come on yet are veterans too. So it's a good majority of people that we've talked to or that are running are veterans. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
pretty cool.
No, and in addition to having Republicans who are pro-freedom, I'd love to also see Democrats slide back down on the scale from authoritarian to more pro-freedom, and hopefully we can have a much more balanced system of power where it's not tyranny versus freedom or liberty, but it's actually, two people who believe in liberty arguing about what means are best to implement something versus, pro-liberty and an anti-liberty setup. And I'm not saying every Democrat's anti-liberty, but it sure feels like the kind of the central committee is. So
one of my favorite things is out here is because we're very conservative out here. And one of my favorite things is I got in an argument with one of my fellow commissioners about how small can we make government?
Oh, that would be a good exercise to do, is how tiny can it get? I guess you would only have to get down to one commissioner.
I know. It was so funny because I was like, I remember we having this huge argument, and finally somebody came in and says, guys, you're talking about making government smaller. Just leave it alone. It's good. We're making government smaller.
Yeah. How small can it get? That's interesting.
Commissioner Byron's bill just doesn't make government small enough, and my bill makes it even smaller.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
His bill only reduces government by 20%. Those are rookie numbers.
It's funny. That's a funny argument. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, sir. Appreciate having you on.
Thanks a bunch.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.